I came home from war. Her text, don't come. It's over. I replied, as you wish. 1 call later, 19 missed calls. Her lawyer was panicking. Tell us where in the world you are joining us from, please. Tell us. Let's get started with today's tale. Homecoming, Chapter 1. Brick Broadywayne was physically assaulted by the intense July heat when he disembarked from the military bus at Fort Benning. He was at last home after 3 exhausting tours with the Army Rangers in some of the most inhospitable places in the Middle East. The weight of all he had saw and experienced over the last 4 years was much heavier than his duffel bag. For the first time since arriving in the United States, Brian looked at his phone. He anticipated receiving a message from his 12-year wife, Candace, confirming that she was en route to get him. As his mind raced through possibilities, he read, "Don't bother coming. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over." He stood still in the hot Georgia heat, watching fellow soldiers stream past him with their own homecoming celebrations waiting. The message burned into his retinas. Perhaps it had been normal since their last video call 3 weeks ago. Brian's thumbs hovered over his phone screen and a dozen angry responses flashed through his mind, but he typed just 2 words, "as you wish." Anyone who knew Brian well would see the quiet danger in those words. Their conversations had become more strained over his final tour, but nothing to suggest this. "As you wish" was what he said before carrying out the most devastating operations with surgical precision. He made a single call. "Leona Fisk speaking." The voice was clear and professional. "It's Brian Wayne." Brian had gained a reputation for calculated precision during his time as a ranger. "Can you meet today? For you?" "Absolutely. My office 2 hours. I need your services immediately. I thought you wouldn't be back until next week." Plans changed. Brian called a cab and directed it to the downtown Atlanta office of one of the state's most feared divorce attorneys, rather than to the suburban home where his wife and kids, Trevor, 16, and Amelia, 14, allegedly no longer wanted him. This was now a mission, and Broderick Harlo never failed a mission. Chapter 2. Opening moves. He gave himself permission to feel a moment of raw emotion as the cab pulled away, squeezing his eyes shut as the betrayal swept over him, and then he compartmentalized, as he had done countless times in combat. Leona Fisk's office spoke of intimidation and success. She said, leaning back in her chair after Brian explained the situation, "It's only when you're actually on U.S. soil that she tells you not to come home." The lawyer herself matched her surroundings, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that calculated your worth as soon as you entered. "What exactly did you mean when you texted 'as you wish'?" "It meant that I'm going to respect her wishes to end our marriage, but on my terms." "Good. The weak ones want to salvage what can't be fixed." "That's cold, even by my standards." Brian said, "I need to know what I'm dealing with. Then I need options." Leona's smile was all predator. They built the first phase of what Leona called the nuclear option over the course of the next hour, and by the time he left her office, Brian had signed documents that set in motion a series of legal and financial maneuvers that would be carried out at precisely 9 a.m. "You're not here to win her back." "No," Brian confirmed. "I'm here to win." The next morning, after booking a hotel room, Brian made his second calculated call to his oldest friend, Wyatt Dennis. The two had enlisted together, but Wyatt had left the military 5 years prior, and they had grown up in rural Pennsylvania together. "I need surveillance on my house," Brian said after updating Wyatt on the situation. "You suppose there's someone else?" "Need to know who's coming and going." Instead of asking, Wyatt said, "I need details and confirmation." "I'm on it," he said, and Brian said, "I'm sorry, brother." By nighttime, his phone was vibrating steadily, so he put it on voicemail, Candace, and then he received messages saying, "What did you do? Answer your freaking phone." At precisely 10:37 p.m., Wyatt texted a set of pictures to Brian's phone, showing a midnight blue Audi parked in his driveway, a tall man with expensively cut hair getting out of the car and being warmly welcomed by Candace at the door, and a final picture of the two of them cuddling in the doorway. "His name is Louis Justin," and Wyatt's message said, "Real estate developer, not the greeting of new lovers, but the cozy closeness of an old connection. Spent the last 2 weeks in your home 6 times. Children appear to know him." Brian carefully put his phone down. Things were starting to fit together and he had a good night's sleep. His phone rang at 9:17 a.m. the following morning, but it wasn't Candace calling. Rather, it was her lawyer, Rutherford, whose voice rose several octaves as he went on the attack. "You have no legal rights to do that with her trust fund." Brian ended the call and turned to the window, allowing himself a small, icy smile. Phase 1 complete. Chapter 3. The soldier's shadow. Brian's path from Pennsylvania farm boy to elite Army Ranger was paved with extraordinary discipline and natural tactical brilliance. You pull this after 19 missed calls. This is extortion. You can't possibly. Raised by a widowed father as the youngest of 4 brothers, Brian learned early on that survival required strategy. While his brothers used brute force, Brian learned to be patient and precise. On his first leave after Ranger School, he met Candace Stanford, a brilliant, ambitious woman from a wealthy New England family who was enrolled in Georgetown Law School. They were married in 6 months, despite her family's reluctance to accept the union because she had chosen a military man, and those were good years. Brian was working as a tactical instructor in the United States when Trevor was born, and Candace developed her legal career while Brian advanced through the ranks of the Rangers. The deployments grew longer and riskier after Amelia was born, and each time Brian returned, the gap between them widened. Candace's father passed away during his second tour, leaving her a sizable trust fund with Byzantine restrictions, one of which was that her husband could not access it without her express consent. Another stated that the money would be held in trust until she remarried or turned 55. Candace was unaware that Brian had discovered a gap in her trust that even her father's high-priced lawyers had overlooked, and that he had spent years researching financial law and structures as a hobby resulting from his tactical mind's fixation with comprehending systems. She had unintentionally activated the clause by sending that text while he was returning from deployment, and although Brian hadn't touched a single penny of her money, he had legally frozen the entire trust, preventing any withdrawals or transfers. It involved temporary reassignment of management rights during periods of docile abandonment by either spouse. Now, the lawyer said, sliding a folder across Leona's desk as he sat in her office for their follow-up appointment. You were right, she said. Louis Justin is more than just your wife's lover. They were acquainted before to your marriage. The time was based on restaurant receipts, hotel bills, and credit card data. He was her ex-boyfriend from law school, Brian said without surprise. About 18 months ago, shortly after you left for your final tour, they got back in touch. Candace was rebuilding her life with someone else, someone who had been waiting in the wings, while he was demolishing buildings and watching friends die. And my kids? For the first time, Brian's voice showed emotion as he inquired. Brian's jaw tightened as he took in the information. What about the house? Has she taken out any new mortgages or loans? Your daughter appears more accepting of the situation. The Lewis guy has been playing daddy. Weekend trips, expensive gifts. Your son seems resistant. His social media suggests he's angry at both adults. The property next door to yours, however, has an intriguing aspect. It was bought 6 months ago by one of Louis Justin's shell companies, and the timing seems to indicate that they may be planning to combine the properties. The pieces came together in Brian's mind, not just an affair, but a total replacement, and Justin was actually moving in next door, getting ready to take over not only Brian's family but also his physical space. The good news is that they have made mistakes. For example, Justin transferred $200,000 to Candace 3 months ago, which she used to redecorate your house. That's marital property that she manipulated using money from her paramour. They're efficient, Brian said icily. Most affairs are impulsive. This one was planned. Leona agreed. Brian nodded. That's good, but not enough. I need you to find me something that will give me leverage regarding the children. Leona raised an eyebrow. The courts tend to favor mothers. The courts favor stability and safety, Brian clarified. She's also been using your joint account to pay household expenses while keeping this relationship going. As Brian left Leona's office, his phone buzzed with a text from Wyatt. Got something big, meet me at the usual place. The usual place was a small diner on the outskirts of Atlanta where they'd frequently met during leaves, and as Brian walked in, he saw Wyatt in a back booth, his civilian clothes still maintaining a military straight posture. How awful. Depends on your definition, Wyatt said, shoving a little flash drive across the table in response to Brian's question as he slid into the chair. Your wife and her boyfriend have been plotting more than just playing house. Their intention is to go to Costa Rica. Purchases of real estate, queries for the children's schools, etc. Immediately following the commencement of classes next month. The children are not yet aware. Brian put the flash disk in his pocket. How did you obtain this? Wyatt grinned glumly. Let's assume that Mr. Justin, cloud accounts require improved cybersecurity. As he processed this knowledge, Brian nodded. Without him, his family wasn't simply moving on. They intended to vanish into another nation. Something harder formed from the chill inside him. Brian responded, I need one more thing. Entry to our house. I only want to get something back that is mine, not to confront them. The kids will stay at Justin Lake's house with his maid tonight while they attend a charity banquet downtown. Wyatt examined the face of his companion. Whatever you have planned is essential, Brian concluded for him. Do you agree with me? Their eyes met in a wordless exchange of words, the sort developed in battle. Brian's smile stopped short of his eyes as Wyatt replied, but remember who you are. I'm banking on them to forget precisely that. Chapter 4. Unspoken Truths. From the outside, the house appeared just like Brian remembered. A large colonial in a posh neighborhood. But inside, everything was different. The sleek, contemporary furniture in chilly grays and blues had taken the place of the cozy leather couches he had chosen. The walls were now covered in abstract art, and family pictures had been taken down. Candace seemed to have tried to remove any traces of their shared life. Moving slowly through the altered room, Brian meticulously noted the alterations in a detached manner. He discovered the secret wall concealed behind a painting in the home office. As he had left it, the combination was Trevor's birthday. There was a small fireproof box with a sealed envelope, documentation from his military career, and his grandfather's World War II medals. He didn't take the rest. He just took the envelope. He saw something on Melanie's desk as he turned to go. Blueprints for buildings. He took detailed pictures of them. Detailed drawings showing how to join their home to the one next door to form a single, enormous estate. 4 months after his most recent deployment, the plans were dated 14 months ago. Brian stopped by his kids' rooms one last time before he left. Trevor's looked a lot like he recalled. Organized chaos, gaming posters, and sports trophies. A framed picture of himself and Trevor on a fishing vacation 3 years prior, both grinning broadly, caught Brian's attention on his desk. In the whole house, it was the sole picture of Brian that was still visible. With its elegant purples and silvers, Amelia's room had entirely changed and now resembled a college student's apartment rather than the bedroom of a 14-year-old. Brian saw concert tickets, school honors, and a picture of Amelia, Candace, and Louis at what looked like a ski resort on her bulletin board. They appeared to be the ideal family. As quietly as he had entered the house keys he had used, he departed. Supposedly broken keys that were purposefully left on the kitchen counter for Candace to find. Wyatt recommended Harris Bentley, a former intelligence officer who is now a private investigator, and Brian met with him the following morning. Brian clarified, I need everything on Louis Justin, not merely the superficial level. I must know what he is concealing. Harris nodded, a small man with sharp eyes. Everyone has something to hide. To what extent do you want me to delve? Absolutely. Brian carried out the next part of his plan while Harris investigated. He made plans to unintentionally run across Trevor's son after practice by getting in touch with his lacrosse instructor. Trevor was stunned to see his father when he came out of the field house. Dad, the teenager said in a broken voice. Where have you been? Mom added you weren't coming back. Brian stated simply, I'm here, son. Trevor's expression alternated between disbelief, bewilderment, and rage. 4 days have passed since your landing. I had to organize a few things first. I wasn't welcome at home, as your mother made obvious. Trevor averted his gaze. Trevor's head snapped up. She told us you wanted a clean break. No messy goodbyes. Brian maintained a neutral expression despite the outburst of anger. I see. Are you and Mom getting divorced? It seems that way. She said you abandoned us, that you chose the Rangers over us. Is that why you didn't want to see me? I never said that. He acts like he's doing us all this big favor. Amelia buys it, but I don't. Trevor kicked at the ground because of Louis. Partly. I hate him. Trevor muttered. They spoke for 30 minutes, with Brian being careful not to make fun of Candace while proving that many of Trevor's assumptions were false. I have to leave, but no matter what happens between your mother and me, I'm still your father. That doesn't change, Brian said as Melanie's SUV pulled into the parking lot. Trevor called after him as he left, Dad, are you just going to let him take everything? Brian turned, his face unreadable, and said, No, son, I'm not. On paper, Louis Justin is legitimate, with successful developments, a clean record, and respect in the community. However, there are inconsistencies, including 3 former business partners who abruptly sold their shares for pennies on the dollar, a building inspector who changed careers after approving one of Hayes' controversial properties, and most intriguingly, a pattern of targeting wealthy married women as investors while their husbands are otherwise busy. Harris Bentley presented his preliminary findings later that evening. Brian leaned forward and explained that he works with women whose husbands are often absent, and that Justin is able to access the family's wealth through the woman and the move to Costa Rica. The husband is usually gone permanently after a divorce, and Justin becomes their friend, confidant, and business advisor. That's where it gets troubling. Harris's face darkened. Justin owns property there, sure, but he's also connected to less respectable businesses, and the area where he's bought land is notorious for being a haven for people trying to evade debt or legal obligations. He's going to isolate her, Brian decided. Brian nodded. That's why she needed the divorce finalized quickly. They're liquidating assets before disappearing. The timeline is aggressive. Property transfer for your house is already in motion, scheduled to close in 3 weeks. Get her away from family, friends, and familiar legal systems. Possibly. There's one more thing, Harris said. The envelope you pulled from your safe. What was in it? Insurance, Brian said. Something I thought might be needed someday. The envelope held records of a prenuptial agreement Brian had made with Candace's father prior to his passing, a commitment that the older man would create a separate trust for Brian's military earnings to safeguard them in the event of a divorce, provided Brian signed a prenuptial agreement restricting his claims to Melanie's family funds. This piece of leverage, along with Harris's findings, gave Brian what he needed for the next step. He called Leona and said, "I'm ready to make my move. Set up a meeting with Candace and her lawyer for tomorrow. They're demanding you unfreeze the trust immediately," Leona warned. The agreement had been properly notarized but never filed with the main trust documents. The conference room crackled with tension as Candace sat across from Brian, her once familiar face now a mask of cold disdain. Chapter 5. The Awakening. Tell them I'm ready to discuss terms. Conference room, your office, 2 p.m. And if they refuse, they won't, Brian said confidently. Candace's got a timeline to keep. A silver-haired lawyer named Rutherford stood next to her, projecting cultivated indignation, while Leona looked calm, almost amused. This is financial abuse and harassment. Your client has maliciously interfered with assets that are explicitly excluded from marital property. My client has exercised a legitimate legal option triggered by Mrs. Wayne's own actions, Rutherford said. Candace's eyes narrowed. You weren't supposed to be back for another week. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to Brian, and her voice was tight and controlled. Maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation if she'd waited until he was actually home before changing the locks and barring him from his residence. Deployment timelines vary, Brian said calmly, but your preparations were already well in motion, weren't they? What are your plans? Rutherford interrupted. Brian pushed a folder across the table. Candace's face was pale as she leafed through the papers, which included flight tickets, property purchases in Costa Rica, and applications for my children's schools. Brian went on, You're planning to take my children out of the country without my knowledge or consent. That's parental kidnapping, Candace said. And you've been absent for the majority of their lives anyway. Absence serving my country, Brian clarified. But not by choice. You had choices, Candace said. You always picked the Rangers over us, and you picked Louis Justin long before my last deployment. Brian retorted it was 14 months ago to be exact, when you commissioned architectural plans to connect our property with his Rutherford that you cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Every re-enlistment was a choice. Every special assignment was a choice. Candace's relief was evident, but it was brief. Brian said, I'll unfreeze the trust on 2 conditions. The children stay in Atlanta through the end of the school year with a standard joint custody arrangement. No international relocations without court approval. Maybe we should concentrate on the trust fund's immediate issue. I don't know what you're talking about. You told them I abandoned them, that I didn't want to see them, and that I protected them from harm. Second, Candace, I want the truth from you, not about the affair or what you told the kids. Rutherford nodded. The room fell silent, and even Rutherford appeared troubled. Your father might come home in a body bag, but don't worry, Brian said quietly, because you lied to them. Neither Trevor nor Amelia ever said they didn't want to see me. That was your manipulation. Brian slid another document across the table, the agreement with her father, and then this gets filed with the trust administrators. Your father made certain promises to me that supersede your prenuptial protections. Tell them the truth. Then we can talk about unfreezing the trust. And if I refuse, Candace challenged. After 30 seconds, Candace gave a sharp nod, saying, Fine, I'll tell them the truth. Candace's face turned white as she read the document. Your father respected service and sacrifice. Brian added he also recognized that you inherited his ruthless streak. But this doesn't change anything, Brian. I'm still divorcing you. I wouldn't have it any other way, Brian said calmly. Later that night, Trevor texted Brian, "Mom told us what really happened. Why didn't you call us yourself?" "I needed to be sure I could be part of your lives before making promises," he said. "Are you back for good now?" "Yes, no more deployments," was the reply. After a lengthy silence, Amelia became irate with her mother and began sobbing in her room. Brian's chest constricted as he told her, "I'll see you both this weekend." "My place." "You have a place?" "I will by Saturday." The next stage was moving more quickly than expected, and Brian needed to find a place to live and establish stability as soon as possible. He must first neutralize Louis Justin, whose business model involved a sophisticated form of real estate fraud, as revealed by Harris Bentley's deeper investigation. Justin bought properties through shell companies, inflated their values through manipulated appraisals and cosmetic improvements, and then sold them to investment groups that included his romantic partners or their family trusts. According to Harris, it's not technically illegal if everyone is aware of what they're investing in. However, Justin conceals important information, and 3 of his past romantic partners lost millions of dollars before they realized what had happened. Additionally, Candace has already invested $1.20 in $2 million from her trust in his most recent development, the one in Costa Rica. Brian processed the information, said the property exists, but the permits, infrastructure, and projected values are all smoke and mirrors. And once there with no support system, she'd be completely dependent on him, Brian concluded. So his plan is to get her and her money to Costa Rica, where U.S. financial regulations don't apply. For the first time, his anger was tinged with concern for Candace, who was still the mother of his children in spite of everything. She had betrayed him completely, but maybe she was being manipulated by someone just as adept at deceit. Brian decided that he needed evidence that would stand up in court, and he needed to act fast. Harris asked, "What are you planning?" Brian said, to give Louis Justin exactly what he wants, or at least what he thinks he wants. Chapter 6. The unraveling Louis Justin had made his life on calculated risks in the ability to read people, taking great satisfaction in his ability to spot weaknesses and skillfully take advantage of them. Curiosity overcame caution when Mr. Wayne, the inconvenient husband who was supposed to be sent off with a swift, clean divorce, asked to meet privately at Justin's downtown office. Mr. Wayne, Justin, unexpectedly rose from behind his imposing desk and greeted him with professional courtesy. "I felt it was time for us to talk directly. Man to man." "I appreciate that." Justin gestured to a chair. "Though I'm not sure what there is to discuss. Candace has made her decision." Brian took in the man who'd been sleeping with his wife. He was tall, athletic, but soft around the edges with the practiced charm of someone used to getting his way. "That's exactly why I'm here," Brian continued, staying upright to accept that choice and offer a solution that works for everyone. Hayes' face was expressionless, but his stance changed slightly. "I'm listening," he added. "Candace is what you desire. My house is yours. I've accepted that you want my family," Brian said bluntly, "but the current strategy, the attorneys, and the court battles will drag on for months if not years. No one prevails. What exactly do you propose?" "A clean break. I express my interest in the house by signing. I accept the terms of the divorce. Even your relationship has my support." Brian pushed out the word. "I demand a monetary settlement that takes into account my contributions to the marriage in return, as well as assured access to my children." He looked at him, trying to find the trap. "It's remarkably rational. Candace characterized you as unyielding." Brian said, "Being in the military teaches you to recognize unwinnable battles, as well as to shift strategically." "I understand." He is leaning back. "What would the terms of this monetary settlement be?" $2 million. "A fraction of what you would have to pay for protracted litigation." Justin observed, "You seem very confident about what litigation would cost me." Brian gave a shrug. "Everything has been thoroughly researched by me." Justin paused at something in his tone. Uncertainty briefly appeared on his face before his self-assured facade reappeared. "I'll have to talk to Candace about this." Naturally. However, there is a time limit on this offer. 24 hours a day. There isn't much time for such important choices. Brian answered, "I thought you were a man who understood the importance of seizing opportunities quickly." As soon as Brian was gone, Justin called Candace and told her what had happened. Both of them were unaware that, with the assistance of a building maintenance employee who owed Wyatt a favor, Harris Bentley had set up surveillance equipment in Justin's office the night before. Justin told Candace that he was desperate. "This is ideal. Before winter arrives, we may safely wrap things up and arrive in Costa Rica. Through the speaker, Candace's voice answered, "It seems too easy." Brian persists in trying. He is not a businessman, he is a soldier. He's in over his head. I know him better than you do. He's using some strategy. What is there for him to do even if he is? The confidence has been restored. The selling of the residence is underway. Everything is moving for us. How about the kids? Candace inquired. Until we are prepared to depart, we will adhere to the custody agreement. He will have settled into his new life by then, and the children will still prefer our circumstances given Costa Rica's private school possibilities. Furthermore, it will be too late if he challenges the international transfer. Believe me, Mel, this is the goal we have been pursuing. Everything is coming together. Everything was captured on the recording. The deliberate manipulation, the casual conspiracy to break custody agreements, and the obvious intention to deceive through the Costa Rican investment scheme. Brian had just what he needed. Justin called Brian the following day to accept his terms, and they agreed to meet the next morning to sign paperwork. He and Leona met that night to finalize their counterattack. From a legal standpoint, this is thin ice, Leona said, going over the proposal. Brian reassured her, the recording is just insurance. A judge might view the recording as entrapment. After everything she had done, Brian's face hardened. The financial evidence is what matters. The documented pattern of fraud, the misrepresented investments. We just needed Justin to confirm his intentions regarding my children. And you sure you want to warn Candace, he said. Candace is no longer at the center of this. My goal is to shield my kids from both of them. Everything was in place. At 9 a.m., Phase 3 would start. The following day, just when Justin thought he was solidifying his triumph, Amelia was a surprise guest at Brian's hotel room that evening. She stood in the hallway, defiant and smeared with tears. She yelled out, "Mom doesn't know I'm here." As Brian ushered her inside, his heart pounding, she demanded, "Amelia, you can't just, why didn't you fight for us? You just disappeared when you got back," she said. "Trevor helped me sneak out. You made no attempt to see us." Brian whispered softly, "I was told you didn't want to see me. And you think that? I wrote to you every week after everything," she said, her voice breaking. "I emailed you as soon as I could." When he saw how much his daughter had grown while he was away, Brian sat down in front of her and said, "I'm fighting for you now. I promise you that. Mom's selling our house. We're moving away. I waited for you to come home and then nothing." Brian said firmly, "No, you're not. Not unless you want to," Amelia said, examining his face. "You can't stop it," Lewis said, "because you signed papers. You don't know what's coming." "What does that mean?" Brian said carefully, "It means that sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be, and sometimes the truth has to come out before people get hurt." Brian's eyes widened as she asked, "Are you going to hurt Lewis?" "Not physically," he assured her, "but yes, I'm going to stop him from taking what's mine, including my family." Amelia nodded slowly. "Good. I hate him. He acts nice when Mom is around, but when she's not, he's different." "Different how?" Brian asked, his blood running cold. When Trevor argued with him last week, he grabbed Trevor's arm and left marks. The cold rage Brian had been carefully controlling crystallized into something lethal. He told Trevor he needed to man up and stop missing you. She said, "I need to adjust to reality because you never really cared about us anyway." "Do you think your mother knows?" Amelia shook her head. Trevor didn't want to tell her, saying it would only make things worse. Brian took a deep breath, readjusting his plans. "I need you to go home now, but tomorrow things are going to change." "When did this happen?" "Thursday. Trevor wouldn't let him in his room and they got into a fight." "We need to speed up the timeline," he said, "and add one more element to our plan." "What's changed?" she asked. "Everything," Brian said. "Justin crossed a line he can't uncross." Chapter 7. The Reckoning? I assure you that. After safely returning Amelia home with Wyatt's assistance to make sure she wasn't detected, Brian made one last call to Leona. When Brian arrived for their 9 a.m. meeting, Justin was waiting with 2 lawyers and a smug smile. "Mr. Wayne," he said, holding out his hand, "I appreciate your pragmatism in this matter." The Justin Development Group offices were located on the 27th floor of Atlanta's premier business tower, all glass, chrome, and calculated intimidation. "I need all parties present before we proceed," Brian said calmly, ignoring the outstretched hand. "Where's Candace?" "She should be here." "Hey," smile tightened. "Candace trusted me to handle the financial aspects. She'll join us for the final signatures." "That won't work," Brian said calmly. One of Justin's attorneys, a younger man with a nervous appearance, shifted uneasily. Mister, I have her power of attorney for business matters. Justin assured us that Mrs. Wayne had approved these terms. Did she approve them in writing? Brian asked. This isn't a business matter, Justin said smoothly. It's a divorce settlement affecting my children. Either Candace attends or we get together when she's free. The conference room door opened again and Leona arrived, followed by a stern-looking man in a conservative suit. Justin jaw tensed for a second before he forced another grin. Of course, let me call her. Agent Donovan was stuck in traffic, so Leona remarked sharply, Wayne, I apologize for the delay. Agent Justin had abruptly stopped talking on his phone. Franklin Donovan, FBI, Financial Crimes Division. The man put his credentials on the table and introduced himself. I'm here as an observer only. Justin lawyers looked at one another in concern. What is this? Justin demanded, turning back to the table. Brian said insurance. Is Candace coming? She'll be here in 20 minutes. Justin said, his once confident manner now clearly strained. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. That gives us just enough time to review some additional documents I've brought. Leona handed out folders to everyone in attendance, which revealed a pattern of conspiracy, wire fraud, and securities fraud that spans 7 years in 3 states. This is ridiculous. A clear attempt at extortion. No extortion, Brian said calmly. Just facts. You've manipulated real estate investments to defraud past romantic partners. You're trying to do the same with my wife and her trust fund. Most recently, you've physically abused my 16-year-old son. Justin laughed, but it sounded hollow. Brian interrupted him, and witness statements appeared. His face was devoid of color. That's a lie. We have images of the injuries. Candace entered, her expression bewildered and growing more frightened as she took in the scenario. What's happening? Why is an FBI agent here, Lewis? She questioned. Mrs. Wayne. Please join us, said Agent Donovan, acknowledging her. We were just talking about your investment in the development in Costa Rica. My investment? Candace turned to face Justin and asked, what investment? That wasn't an investment, so Candace froze when she saw the $1.2 million transfer you approved 3 weeks ago. Brian provided for the Villa Parasso development. Lewis showed me the plans, the pictures, the renderings, and the stock photos. That's not possible, he said. There is no retirement home, Brian said gently. The development exists only on paper. The property you think you purchased is an undeveloped parcel of land worth less than $100,000. Candace sank into a chair and stared at the evidence as Leona added, here are the actual property records, permits, or lack thereof, and banking transfers showing where your money actually went. Lewis, tell me this isn't true. Hayes' facade of confidence broke completely. Candace's head snapped up. You knew about this? She asked Brian. I suspected something was wrong when I saw the Costa Rica plans, said Candace. This is a misunderstanding. The development is in the early stages. The development doesn't exist, said Agent Donovan flatly. We've been investigating Mr. Justin for 18 months. Your husband's evidence has simply accelerated our timeline. According to the investigation, the entire meeting was a ruse. Hey, spat, your husband set us both up. No, Brian clarified. Just you. Candace is just as much a victim of your fraud as your previous partners were. Justin lawyers were already packing up their belongings and mumbling that they needed to speak with their firm partners. Candace's voice was barely audible as she asked, what did you mean about assault? Brian slid a picture of Trevor's arm across the table, showing obvious finger-shaped bruises. On Thursday night, when Trevor wouldn't let him into his room, Candace looked at the picture, and then at Justin, horror showing on her face. You hurt my son, Candace said. Justin objected, saying, I barely grabbed him. Candace's palm struck Justin's face, causing the slap to reverberate throughout the conference room. You lying bastard, Justin said. You assured me that you wouldn't ever, Mrs. Wayne, said Agent Donovan. I propose that we continue this conversation at our office. Both you and your son will need to provide official statements. What happened next was a haze of activity. 2 more FBI officers who had been waiting outside escorted Justin out. Candace, shell-shocked, agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. When the room finally cleared, only Brian, Leona, and Candace remained. Why? Candace asked, looking at Brian. After what I did to you, why would you protect me from him? I didn't do it for you, Brian replied. I did it for Trevor and Amelia. They've been through enough. Candace nodded slowly, tears welling. What happens now? Now, Brian said, standing. You tell the children the complete truth about everything. Then we'll discuss next steps. As he walked out, Leona, following Candace, called after him. Did you ever love me at all? Or was I just part of some mission plan? Brian hesitated at the doorway. I loved you enough to let you leave when I thought that's what you wanted. And I loved you enough to stop you when I knew you were being manipulated into something hazardous. But not enough to forgive me, Candace murmured quietly. No, Brian agreed. Not enough for that. Chapter 8. Aftermath. 3 weeks later, the legal landscape had shifted entirely. Louis Justin faces many federal accusations for fraud and financial offenses. His assets were frozen, his reputation ruined. The FBI probe had grown to include 6 new victims across 3 states. Candace had moved out of the family home into a small apartment. The beautiful house now sitting empty as the legal complications unraveled. The trust fund had been salvaged, most of it at least through timely legal intervention. The Costa Rican real estate market has completely imploded. Meanwhile, 15 minutes from the kids' school, Brian had bought a cozy 4-bedroom home. He had agreed to work as a security consultant for a large company, using his military experience to give his family the stability they needed. Without the involvement of the court, the custody arrangement was resolved. Holidays would alternate, and the kids would spend an equal amount of time with each parent. As Amelia struggled with her conflicted sentiments toward her parents, Trevor had already claimed the largest bedroom in Brian's new home as primarily mine. Brian watched Trevor practice lacrosse moves in the yard on a cool fall Saturday while he sat on his back deck. Amelia was inside, watching the talk via the open window while pretending to read. Both Trevor and Brian acknowledged this fact in silence. Trevor paused with the lacrosse stick and added, "Mom says she's sorry," without warning. "It's getting annoying. She has a lot to be sorry for," Brian said thoughtfully. "Like 100 times a day. Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" Trevor inquired. Brian thought about the query. "It's not easy to forgive, Trevor. Despite what she did to our marriage, I can work with her as your mother." "That sounds harsh." "Perhaps, but there are things that cannot be reversed." Trevor gave the stick a contemplative spin. "She claimed that she became enmeshed in Louis's way of life, wealth, and connections. Claimed to feel significant once more. Did she think I didn't care about her?" Brian inquired with genuine interest. "She claimed that when you were deployed, she felt as like she was constantly waiting, which alarmed her." Slowly, Brian nodded. He might grasp the reasoning, but it was not a defense. Desperate actions were prompted by fear. He had witnessed it in battle zones innumerable times. "How about Louis?" Trevor inquired. "Do you feel bad about what happened to him?" "No," Brian truthfully replied. "He may spend a long time behind bars, according to Mom. He hurt you. He tried to steal our family. He deserves what's coming. That's the standard penalty for assault and fraud." Trevor was silent for a while. "I assumed you wouldn't care anymore, but I still wanted to tell you about the arm thing." Brian felt the comments as if they were actual blows. "Look at me, Trevor. You and your sister are very important to me, and nothing in this world could make me not care. I will always defend you and stand up for you. You get it?" Trevor blinked quickly and nodded. "Yes, I now understand." Candace stood clumsily in the living room, dressed more simply than Brian had seen her in years, when Amelia called from inside. "Dad, Mom's here." Minimal makeup, jeans, and a sweater. Something more genuine, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with, had taken the place of the polished corporate lawyer persona. She said to the kids, "I need to talk to your father alone." "Why don't you get your things for the weekend?" Candace asked, surveying the house by herself. Warm, cozy, and beginning to take on the characteristics of a true home. "You've performed admirably." Brian noted the children appeared at ease. Candace acknowledged that they are happier than they have been in months. "Trevor is getting better grades. In fact, Amelia is speaking to me once more." She hesitated. "I must apologize to you. Not just the legal wrangling, but an actual one." "Candace, you have nothing to repay me." "Yes, I do. I let my anxieties and inadequacies to lead me to a predator. I tried to remove you from our lives, lied to our kids, and broke our vows. And you saved me in spite of all that," she said, her voice breaking. Candace winced but agreed. "I saved our children," Brian said. "But you were collateral." "Fair enough, but I am grateful and remorseful, more than I can express." Brian examined the woman he had previously centered his life on, and the rage that had been feeding him these past few weeks had burned to flames. He finally responded, "I accept your apologies," adding, "For the children's sake, we'll develop a workable co-parenting relationship." What had replaced it was something colder, more lasting, a fundamental disconnection rather than hatred. But it can only be that. "I understand," Candace said, "but I didn't expect to be reconciled. I just wanted you to know that I now realize what I threw away, and I will always regret it." The kids came back with their weekend bags before Brian could reply. The instant was over. Although accepted, the confession was not cleared. Later that evening, after dinner and board games, Brian sat with a drink of whiskey on his terrace while both kids were asleep in their new quarters. Wyatt's text buzzed across his phone. "How was Candace's experience?" "Apologies, regrets, the usual," was Brian's response. Brian replied, "And you're still holding the line. Some betrayals can't be undone." His phone was ringing almost instantly. "You know," Wyatt responded to Brian's response, "forgiveness isn't just for her. It's for you too." "I don't need forgiveness," Brian said. Brian grinned in spite of himself, saying, "I need clarity, and I have it now." "Clarity, huh? Is that why you're sitting alone drinking whiskey at midnight?" "Bullshit," Wyatt remarked amiably. "I'm celebrating a victory. The mission is complete. Punishment was the goal. You have no idea what will happen now that it's over." That was true. Brian knew he had achieved the icy laser-like goal that had motivated him ever since he got Melanie's text. Justice was coming for Louis Justin. They had revealed the financial schemes. The emptiness persisted even though the kids were secure and starting to recover. Brian said, "What do you suggest?" "Move forward," was Wyatt's straightforward response. After hanging up, Brian thought about what his friend had said. "Not with Candace. That ship has sailed. But with life. The war is over, brother. Time to come home for real." He looked up at the sky, the same stars he had stared at from mountain outposts and desert camps, and the soldier in him saw the wisdom. In warfare, you don't stay in the battlefield once it was secured. You finish the task, pay respect to the dead, and then work toward the next goal. His armor was starting to come off for the first time since he returned. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe never, but the prospect of something different, something fresh. Chapter 9. Resolution. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized, and the terms were reasonable and amicably negotiated. Brian's security consulting business had grown. His military experience was useful in corporate settings. Louis Justin had accepted a plea deal, facing 8 years in federal prison with restitution requirements that would keep him financially constrained for decades. And the custody arrangement had worked out well, with both children flourishing under the stability of their new normal. On a warm spring afternoon, Brian stood watching Trevor play in the state lacrosse championship, with Amelia cheering for her brother enthusiastically on his side and Candace keeping a respectful distance from Brian on the other. He had added 2 more former Rangers to his team, forming a brotherhood of support that reminded him of what he'd valued most during his service. "He works hard at it," Brian said, turning to see an athletic lady with curly brown hair watching the game with professional interest. "He's really good," said a voice next to Brian, who was close enough to put on a united front for their son but far enough to recognize boundaries. "I'm Vanessa, by the way. College recruiter for Northwestern." "Brian Wayne, that's my son. Number 17. Great stick skills." They talked easily through the first half, with Vanessa's game knowledge impressive. "Dad, I'm getting hot chocolate," Amelia said at halftime. "Sure, scholarship potential. Do you want me some water?" "Miss Wayne," Vanessa asked, pointing to Candace. "Miss Wayne? Can I get you anything?" Candace looked surprised to be called that. "Oh no. Thank you. And it's Stanford now. I've gone back to my maiden name. Mom, come help me carry everything." Amelia suggested a blatant attempt to give her father space with the attractive recruiter. Vanessa grinned as they left, saying, "Smart kid. Not subtle, but smart." Brian laughed, and they both agreed that I should return to the world. Trevor asks, "And do you need to get back out there?" Her curiosity was evident, and the issue was straightforward. 6 months prior, Brian would not have even acknowledged the opportunity, much less contemplated seizing it. Then he was truly thinking about it. "I might," he said. Eventually, Vanessa nodded, appreciating the calm reply. "Well, when eventually arrives, maybe we could get coffee, talk about your son's lacrosse future, among other things." She gave him a business card, their fingers briefly touching. After Trevor's team won in a thrilling finish, the celebration spilled into an early dinner at the teenager's favorite restaurant. Candace excused herself, citing work commitments, leaving Brian alone with the kids. "I'm in town until Sunday." The game resumed before Brian could reply, but something had changed. A door cracked open to possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider. "Who was the woman with whom you were speaking?" Between gulps of burger, Trevor inquired, "A college recruiter." Brian answered, "From Northwestern. She was very impressed with your play." "Dad." Trevor rolled his eyes. "She gave you her number." "I noticed." Brian maintained, but his faint smile betrayed him, that this was for recruitment purposes. "Amelia said you should call her." "She's smart too," Brian said, "because she's pretty and she knew about lacrosse." Later that night, after dropping the kids off at Melanie's apartment, Brian returned home to an empty house and put Vanessa's card on his desk, not ready to act just yet, but not dismissing the idea out of hand. Candace texted him, "Just a friendly heads up that our son is planning your wedding." Trevor couldn't stop talking about the Northwestern recruiter, saying she might be the one for you. Brian smiled, but he also replied, "Thanks for the warning, I'll manage expectations." The unexpected response from Melanie was, "You deserve happiness, Brian. I mean that truly." He stared over the message, not knowing how to react, and then he just wrote, "So do the kids. Thank you for today." It wasn't reconciliation or forgiveness, but it was an admission that they had gone past the battlefield and into whatever lay ahead, their paths diverging, but their shared love for their children keeping them forever connected. When Brian got up early the next morning for his weekend run, he looked at Vanessa's business card that was still on his desk, and after giving it some thought, he picked it up and put it in his wallet. The war was over. He had safeguarded what was most important. He had stayed loyal to his values, never giving in, never forgiving those who had deceived him, but also not letting resentment consume him. Brian thought about the text message that had started it all as he stepped outside into the morning light. "Don't bother coming. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over." His response had been straightforward, "As you wish." It wasn't acquiescence or surrender, but the cool declaration of a man who knew that sometimes the most effective way to respond was to accept the challenge and respond on your own terms. For the first time in years, Brian Wayne was at home after the war was fought and firmly won. Sometimes the quietest response, like Brian's "as you wish," carries the greatest strength. If you're facing betrayal, suspicion, or false accusations, don't explode. Get calm. Get smart. Protect your peace, gather proof, and lean on those who won't let you fall. If kids are involved, make them your mission. The pain is real, but so is your power. Have you ever been betrayed or blamed without proof? How did you handle it? Or how do you wish you had? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone here. Let's talk.